Here's how to remake Outside on FL Studio. Now, this song was produced by BBY Kobe. The key is A flat minor and the BPM is 135. Step 1. The melodies. Now, there's a lot of melodies in this beat. Probably the hardest bit of the remake was doing these melodies. First off, we've got an intro bass that has a pluck kind of put into it. You've got a brass, strings, brass pad, couple leads, couple synths, and then some synth chords. Now firstly, starting off with the intro bass, I used an Analog Lab preset for the pluck individually and also for the actual bass. Now the hard bit was actually getting that pluck accurate. I looked for a lot of presets and I could only find this one preset off Analog Lab, the 3-octave knock, that has that little pluck in the start of it. And what I did was I kind of EQ'd it so it's just a pluck that you could hear, and I kind of messed around with the brightness to try and get it as accurate as possible. I got fairly close, and this was probably like the worst bit of my remake was this actual intro bass bit. And then I just accompanied that with a different bass, which was just from Analog Lab again, and I used a effect off Synology to kind of get that step filter effect where it's kind of jolting between the D and the E. And yeah, I got that bit pretty accurate, and it should sound like this. Then moving on from that, we've got the strings. These come in the intro, and then they come in through the whole rest of the song. They just change the actual velocity they're played at. Now I've made an amalgamation here of just different strings from SRX Orchestra and SRX Strings to try and get the most accurate. Again, I was slightly off with the tremolo that was used in the original, and also like the tension that they managed to create. I couldn't really replicate that, but I got fairly close. These notes on the screen, it should sound like this. Then after that, we've got a couple bits of brass that come in at the start and are played in and out throughout. I've just got this single trumpet that you can hear in the intro that changes velocity as it's played and kind of brings itself in and out. So I've used an automation clip of the volume to replicate that. And then following that, at the end of the intro, you can hear a brass pad kind of come in and it kind of flushes in. So I've used the Juno 106 preset here that sounds like this. Then moving on to the actual main chunk of the melody, which is obviously the lead. I found an Analog Lab preset that is very, very close to the original. And with that, you put these notes in on screen. It's also got a second pattern underneath it, which just kind of bounces off the main, which I play at a lower velocity. And yeah, it should sound like this. Then moving on to the last sound, we've got a synth chord, and then also another pattern of that same synth chord. Again, I've used a Juno 106 pattern here called Moving Strings. It sounds very, very, very similar, apart from this one little sound effect you can hear on the second pattern as the kind of flush is coming in and out. You'll get what I mean when you hear the original compared to it. But yeah, for the actual first chord pattern, it's just a block chord like these notes on screen. It sounds like this. And then for the second part, it starts at that original chord, drops down to 2 notes, adds another one, so it's kind of like its progression, and it sounds like this. And here's what all the melodies sound like together. Step 2, the drums. Now this was the easiest bit of the remake, the drums. There is only an 8-way, 2 snares, a hi-hat and an open hat to actually do. Now these patterns are very simple as well. There is the 8-way pattern on screen, it was probably the hardest bit of the drums. And then I've got 2 snares. I think the first one is actually accurate, the second one is a bit off, but I just kind of winged it with that because I'd looked through so many snares and I couldn't find a similar one. And then again, the hi-hat, pretty similar. There's just a couple bits where the hi-hat pattern just drops out for like 1 bar. And then finally you got the open hat, again, another very simple pattern. Once you've got all of them in, it should sound like this. Step 3. Mixing and mastering. Now there's a lot to actually do with the mixing and mastering on this track, mainly to do with the actual volume automations. As you can see in the intro, the volume actually just drops out for that split second when Travis comes in and then the beat drops. And then again, when the pluck bass comes back in at some points, obviously you bring that back up and then you put the volume back down for when the actual 808s are playing so they're not clashing too much. And then additionally just some EQs on the drums and then also some boosting on the 808 just to get it hit through the mix, because this mix is actually quite loud, so the 808 has to push itself through. But yeah, aside from that, you should have a pretty accurate remake. Thanks for watching, check out the FLP in the description, here's the full beat.